Serious. What's the creepiest, scariest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? It was the night before my stepmom died, lost her battle to cancer. I was 22, was spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old half-brother, cuddling him and telling him his mom was going to be okay, it wasn't going to hurt anymore. It's about 3 in the morning. At the time, and after a while he immediately sits upright in bed, smiles, says, "I promise to be a good boy, Mommy. I love you." Now my stepmom has been bedridden for the last month, so she's not moving anywhere. But I swear on my life, and my little brother agrees with me, for a split second I saw her standing in the doorway wearing her big giant fur coat, just smiling at us, and just looking relieved. Brother went to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go into my dad and stepmom's room to check on her to see my dad awake and telling me she died about half an hour ago. I genuinely believe she stopped by, on her way to the other side, to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we'd be okay without her before she left. I saw something crouched in the road driving around one night. Its eyes glowed when my headlights hit it, so I assumed an animal of some sort, but when I got within about 15 feet of it, it stood up and looked like a girl standing there. I slammed on my brakes immediately, but suddenly the road was just empty. My friend in the car hadn't seen anything, but asked me a few minutes later if it looked like a girl. He'd apparently seen something similar with his sister a few weeks before in the exact same spot. About a year ago, I was up watching movies late at night when I got hungry and went downstairs for a snack. My room is across from my daughter's room and her door was open. As I was coming back upstairs, I start turning left towards my room when I hear, clear as ever, "Daddy, can you close the door?" I turn around, don't say much, and just close it. Once I'm back in my room, I lie down to watch TV when it hits me. My daughter isn't there. She's spending the night at my parents'. I get up and go to her room, and sure enough, it's empty. I woke up my wife and she thinks I'm crazy. Says I was probably tired and maybe it was the TV. I remember the voice so clear and coming in the direction of her room. It's very possible that it was just my head playing games, but it definitely made me question a few things. When I was about 12 or 13, I woke up in the middle of the night and smelled my father's cologne. Thought it was a little odd since he lived about an hour away but was too tired to care. Went back to sleep, woke up the next morning, and for some reason my mother didn't wake me up for school. My father had passed away the night before. Never told anyone for years about that night, but around the age of 23 I told my mom she was glad to know that she wasn't crazy. That same night she got startled awake, and the dog was staring at the door wagging his tail. Almost like he was saying goodbye before fully leaving. I was dozing on the couch at my parents' place last year. Not comfortably because I was cold. Then I felt a wave of heat pass over me, which was pleasant enough until I felt these firm, pointed fingertips on my head, like something was standing behind me with its hands on my scalp. I was frightened, but then grabbed them and threw them off me. A few minutes later my mom came in and said she heard a door open and had got the feeling she should check on me. Probably a dream, but it was super creepy. 3:13 in the morning. My buddy and I spent the night repoing cars. We pull up to the light in Manchester, state of New Jersey, of 527 and 70. Going straight. In the left turn lane, getting onto 70 East, a blue 97, 98 Honda CR-V. The person driving had no face. Just blank. Like the green man from Always Sunny or No Face from Dick Tracy. My buddy and I both saw it. No bod believed it. I lived in an old house in a small town growing up, and there were quite a few strange things that happened while my family was there. The first thing I remember being creepy about that place is waking up in the middle of the night when I was 6 years old having to pee really bad. I climbed down from the top of the bunk bed and turned to see an old man in a rocking chair sitting by the door. I tried to wake my sister up in the bottom bunk, but she wouldn't wake up, and I remember her being almost like dead weight. I gathered up the courage to run by the man and out the door and fell asleep in the bathroom with the light on and got in trouble with my mom in the morning. My dad also told us that he thought there was something wrong with the place because he kept hearing kids playing and laughing when he would get ready for work in the morning. He woke up around 4 o'clock in the morning for work and would leave at 5:30. He told my mom that he heard laughing around the corner of the kitchen in the hallway one morning and went to see if it was one of us kids. Once he turned to the hall, he saw a glimpse of someone running around the far corner to the living room. He followed this kid running until he was back to the kitchen. When he checked our rooms, we were all sound asleep. My mom also said that she would sometimes see someone staring at her out of the corner of her eye if she was alone. Knowing all of this, when we were older, we would try to scare our friends that came over. One day my friend brought her Furby. This was the late 90s, and we were playing with it in the bedroom. It started acting weird, sounding fucked up like the batteries were draining. It shut off with its eyes closed and wouldn't respond anymore. I said to my friend that we had batteries downstairs we could get. As we were leaving the room with the Furby in hand, it suddenly popped its eyes open and said, "Hee hee, I tricked you," and we just screamed and dropped it Lul. That wasn't the only weird thing with a toy that happened. My mom always told people a story about a toy I had as a baby as well. It was one of those toys that talked when you pressed its hand and said things like, "I love you, and let's be friends." One night I was sleeping and the toy kept going off and repeating, "I love you, I love you." My mom thought it was glitching and went to remove the batteries, but when she opened the back there was nothing inside. She ended up throwing that toy in the garbage. There were a few other weird things that happened there, and I will always believe that house was incredibly haunted. I posted this with my old account but lost my password. One time I was working at a used car dealer. On the side lot there was this huge sliding door that led to the car bays to work on them. One night I got off really late. I dropped off some cars at an auction, picked up another, and had to drop it off before going home. It's almost 10 at night. It's dark and quiet on the street. I look toward the side gate and see under the sliding door and above the door lights and shadows. They look like people are dancing and moving around. I start walking toward it and I hear voices like a party is going on back there. It's really weird 'cause the building setup wouldn't allow lights or shadows from nearby buildings to cast lights or shadows there. So I get closer to take a look. I go by a rectangle about 4 inches by 5 inches. It's cut out to be able to reach in and unlock the gate and lock up. I look in and it's pitch black and totally silent. How it should be. I take a few steps back and away from the hole, and again I see the lights and shadows and the talking and everything. I go near the hole again and again it's totally pitch black. I go to my car and start driving away and see the lights and shadows again. I told my boss to check the cameras. He said he didn't see anything, but he did see my shadow under the door when I walked by to check it. When I was in El Salvador, we went to visit my grandpa up on the mountains there. There were a lot of rumors that a dried up stream next to my grandpa's house was haunted, and that you could hear the cries of the dead and see the devil walk there at night. I didn't think much of it. That day we had left really late from the city, and to get there we had to walk because there weren't many roads to drive. So we finally make it, and it's about 2 in the morning. My grandpa is about to open the door to the house and we turned off the lamps. My eyes are getting used to the darkness, and you could see the stream. It was dried up so you could see the rocks and the mountains because of the moonlight. Anyway, I'm just looking around and I suddenly see this figure by a tree and am thinking, oh, it's probably a drunk guy. But then that shit did something and it stood up tall AF and was blacker than the night itself, and it started doing some sort of movement from left to right. I couldn't believe it. So I touch my cousin and I tell him, hey, do you see that on that tree? And he is like, whoa, and flashes the light. There was nothing there. Throughout that night I felt unease. I fell asleep, and later that morning around 5 o'clock in the morning a bunch of crows were making noise and what sounded like hooves hitting rocks on the stream. I started crying. I was really young. The houses there are made of clay and tree trunks, so sometimes you can see out them walls, and that night traumatized me. My grandpa, through all this, was acting strange, trying to reassure me nothing was wrong. But it was really suspicious because he slept with a riffle next to him. When I was young, from time to time I would see a man in a top hat in the basement of my childhood home. My mother never believed me and told me I was imagining things, then accused me of being on drugs when I was a teenager when I mentioned that I saw him. I hadn't seen him until I was in Crete 15 years later. The question lingers in my mind to this day, who or what? I was walking around with my dog one night as a teen and saw something come out of the sewer. I thought it was a big cat because it stopped, sat and looked like it was washing itself. Then I saw the tail. It was a rat. My dog, a German shepherd, didn't want anything to do with it. I saw myself levitate up off of my bed and then drop back down onto it. I can clearly remember the blankets hanging off the sides of my body and then falling and hitting the bed and feeling the mattress springs creak as I bounced. It was midnight when I lifted and 3 o'clock in the morning when I hit the bed. I lost 3 hours. I was swimming with a friend off of Ocean Park in Santa Monica, just off the wave line. We were cruising along when I passed my hand through seaweed. Strange, I thought. There's never seaweed here. Swim about 10 more strokes and more seaweed. And then again. So I start looking around under the water. It's a bit murky, but that's when I see it. A dorsal fin. The first thing you check for is movement. Is it moving up and down? That's a dolphin. Is it slithering like a snake? That's a shark. And yep, it was slithering. I turned to my buddy and said, "We need to go in, now." He was confused because we hadn't hit our distance. I said, "Let's go," so we swam in. It's the fastest I ever made it back to shore. We swim back in and catch the lifeguard. I asked if he saw that and he said yes. He's never seen anyone swim through a riptide that fast. When I explained it was a shark, he was incredulous. No sharks have been sighted in weeks and definitely none close enough to shore. And the drones would have caught it first and warned us, so there's no way. But I know what I saw. Back when I was about 7, I was hiding in my sister's closet with my cousin playing hide and seek. Her closet was full of clothes to the point where it was to my head. We moved around for a bit, and I swear on my life I saw a woman's hand with red fingernails come out of the pile of clothes and grab my shoulder. My dad was looking through a box of family memorabilia and found a lovely photo of himself standing next to me in my grandfather's driveway. I'm about 5 in the photo and I'm sitting on a horse. It's very clearly me, very clearly my dad, and very clearly the driveway. The problem is nobody can remember a horse ever being there. Also, my mother swears neither my father or I ever owned the clothes we're wearing. Worst of all, there's a huge tree on the corner of my grandfather's driveway. It's been there since he planted it in 1977, and it's there now. It's not in the photo. Parallel universe photo hopped on over to our reality. Me and my badass cousins decided to look in this seemingly abandoned house that was kind of off of the road. We went in and there was still power to the house. The refrigerator was open, and in the middle of the kitchen table was a jewelry box that was open. Everything was neatly arranged. The living room had 4-foot stacks of magazines lining every single wall. One bedroom had only a twin bed in it. It was made up but completely covered in ribbons. Like yay, I won something ribbons for all things horse. The ribbons were in perfect order and lines. The next bedroom was bare except for animals on the walls, ones having been to a taxidermist, not just up on the wall. In this room we heard a thud in the attic and proceeded to get the fuck out of there. While running down the street I looked back. By the house was a shed, but made of cinder blocks and no roof. In the doorway with no door was a shadowy figure. Just a black silhouette of a tall man. It was around noon, so no shadows, no roof and no door. It moved. When we got back we realized one girl had taken a pearl necklace. Now I'm not very superstitious, but I knew this was a rookie mistake. We made her take it back. I watched from the end of the house's driveway. There was a deep freezer next to the back door, no thought to open it, and she put the necklace on it and was turning to leave and something shoved her at least 3 feet backwards and on her ass. She didn't trip, she was obviously pushed by nothing. Being the good cousin and friend, I kindly began to run faster than I ever had in my life. She said something pushed her down. I haven't been in any abandoned house since. Why? Because fuck that. Cup moved on my flat table. I watched it slowly moving to the left where it stopped near the edge. It was a new cup I never used before, and if anyone was wondering, yes, I did throw that bitch out. I had a dream about the tide coming in very fast and high and running to make it on top of a building, just as it turned and started pulling everything away around me. Trees, cars, buildings, people. I woke up and came out, half awake, and told my dad about the dream. He stared at me and told me a massive tsunami had just happened in the Indian Ocean, with scenes on land like I'd described. The really odd part is that I'd never known what a tsunami should really look like. If you'd asked me, I would have said just a really large wave. I was 2 walls and 2 doors away from where my dad watched it on TV, so it's not likely that I overheard anything. I do think it's just a coincidence, though. Millions of people woke up that morning to news of the tsunami. Of all those people, probably lots of people had weird drowning or tide dreams that seemed a whole lot more significant than they were, just because it happened to be that day. When I was 5 years, me and my family lived in Mexico. We stayed at my grandma's house. One night I woke up and my brother and mom were asleep. We shared a bed. I looked towards the window and the street lights are shining through a thin curtain so you could see outside decently. So I looked towards the window and see a shadow figure that looked like a woman, as if she were looking inside our window. She had a pointy hat on too. I remember hiding under the blanket and peeking out, and the shadow was still there. I was too scared to say anything to my mom or to wake her up. I don't remember anything clearly after that. I just remember waking and having the image imprinted in my head, and still do these days. Mexico has some witches, so it's possible that's what I saw. I had just got off work and was taking the back way home to smoke a bowl. The back road goes up a ravine, and as I crested to the top of the ravine I looked east. There was an object in the sky that appeared to be a massive rectangular ship, a skyscraper on its side, slowly floating west. It was massive, 2 city blocks in size. I instantly called my mom to have her go look outside and see if she could see it. She laughed at me and then went outside and said, "What the fuck is that?" She was seeing what I was seeing. I got off the phone with her and was arriving home. I grabbed my roommate and took him outside to show him. He saw it too. We watched it fade into the distance. I have never found any reports or anyone else who saw this besides those people and my sister. It looked like a floating city. It was surreal. I still do not understand what it was, but my mom seeing it really validated it, and it tripped me out. One morning I was getting ready for work and was in the hallway checking out my outfit of the day. I bend down and tie the laces on my shoes, and when I look up there's this human-like figure, but like demonic. It was white but had blackish long messy hair and black huge eyes and smiling black mouth. I don't know how to explain, but it was there for like a few seconds until it disappeared. Scared the hell out of me. My one weird thing was this: some friends and I were hanging out one summer's eve. We were around 15. It was night, clear, and we were all lying on my friend's trampoline in the backyard. We were just all chatting and looking at the stars. Suddenly we're all like, "What the fuck? Did you just see that?" We all swore we saw a formation of stars trade places with each other. They sort of left a tail like a shooting star before resettling in their new positions. They all moved at the exact same time. It was strange. 3 of us seemed to see the same thing. I was working in Lagos, Nigeria, sitting in a bar on one of the lagoons near Lekki, when a body washed up naked except for underwear. I called the waitress over a bit frantically and pointed at the body. She pulled a face and went back into the bar, where I was expecting that she would call the police, but no. She returned with a long stick with a nail on the end, stabbed into his arse and pushed him out like they must have done in the past, as they had made a tool for it. I have so many questions. It's not that people don't believe me, it's more that I hardly believe it myself. It was late, probably between 3 hours of the night, and I was sitting at an intersection waiting for the light to go green. Across from me was a dark road with trees on either side and thick woods off to the left and houses off to the right. So I'm sitting there listening to music when I see something move at the edge of the woods to the left. Now, this is rural New Jersey, so things moving in the woods are either bears or deer, which aren't scary, but deer will fuck your car up if run out in front of you. I turned my high beams on to see what it was, but they didn't reach the woods. Then I saw more movement before the light turned green. I made my left turn and drove off, but I couldn't see what it was. The next day I drive the same route on my way to work, and when I get to that intersection there's cops and ambulance over at the edge of the woods where I saw the movement the night before. I asked a coworker what happened, and he said they had found dismembered body parts there early that morning. I either saw a murderer, a bear, or the Jersey Devil kill and dismember someone. My friend's grandma's house was right up against a cemetery. He always told me it was haunted and would see crazy stuff there, but I never believed him. One night we were over her house, and I swear I saw something the size of a toddler run from the living room, through the dining room, and into the kitchen. When I looked at my friend, he just went, "Did you just see that kid run through the fucking house?" It looked more like a fast-running shadow than an actual person. There was no one there. There were no kids around, it was his grandma's house, and we were the only ones over. It was late at night, and no doors opened or closed. When we told his grandma, she was just like, "Oh, don't worry about it, it happens all the time." After that, I started believing in ghosts. My friend also said when he used to sleep there, he used to push the spare room's TV away from him so it faced away from him, because he would wake up at night and see people in the reflection staring back at him watching him sleeping. It scared the shit out of him. It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended, we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader tell us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths as you do over beers, or when you're enjoying a late-night onsen. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed was positioned next to the window, so if you look up while lying in bed you look out the window. He'd try to scare us by saying in those rooms ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back to the East Ikebukuro Hotel, we check in the early evening, and the first thing we notice is how small the room was. The second thing was they gave us a double bed instead of twin singles. The third, the bed head was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small really to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of shit. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed, no homo. We decided to just let it go since it was just for one night. So we went out for dinner before turning in for the night. That night I get woken up by a door slamming shut and I jolt up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair, and from what could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out, dive and bury my head under my pillow looking back. That was a useless move if anything bad were to happen. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius, I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed, thinking if I don't touch anything it's just my imagination. I didn't think about what I'd do if I did touch something. Little by little my foot moves down the bed when I notice that there is definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Someone was there. I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer till I must have fainted or fallen back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night, and all he says is, "I don't want to talk about it, let's check out." I was maybe 4 or 5. We lived in a somewhat questionable neighborhood at the time, and looking out the window one night I swear I saw a neighbor from an apt nearby with her son. He was on one of those plastic trikes. I believe she ran inside to grab a jacket. In the 3 minutes she was gone, a vehicle pulled up and snatched the kid, took off. His mom came back and was looking for him. I tried to tell the adults in my apt, but no one believed me or the other kids with us. Still the scariest thing that haunts me to this day. I don't know what it was because I don't remember it, because I was a baby toddler, but my mom certainly does and mentions it occasionally. I was her first kid, and when I was born my parents lived in a little old house in Scotland. Mum says that really quite often, both I and the dog would stop whatever we were doing at the same time and both look towards the stairs as if we were watching something either descend or ascend them. This is corroborated by my dad and a few of their friends who saw it happening. It's basically their friend group's weird, inexplicable story. I just happen to be an unwitting part of it. Unfortunately, I have no memory of this at all, and the dog in question died 30 years ago, so they'll never get their answer. When I was 16, I skipped school to stay home and play video games. I set up my PlayStation and made some hot pockets, and right when I get good and comfortable I hear footsteps walking to my room. I glance outside and see my parents aren't home yet, but was still afraid I was going to get caught. Seeing no place to hide, I froze. Suddenly the door was flung open and I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. I must have sat there petrified in that room for half an hour before going outside and waiting for my parents to come home. I tried to explain to my friends later what happened, but they thought I was just pulling some bullshit from the internet. Was walking through the Rockies and managed to tear the muscle on the side of my foot, so was hobbling back. I was on my own like a moron. In the space of hobbling back to Jasper, I saw a white bear. Think they are called spirit bears? Just sitting watching me. Literally thought, fuck's sake, I'm gonna die here mauled by a bear and no one knows where I am. but it just sat there and pawed the dirt in the direction of the town. I limped on keeping an eye on it, and it just watched me. Then I swear to God, no more than 5 minutes later a fucking wolf appears limping exactly on the same foot I'm limping on, eyes me up and continues on its journey. I think I was even too pathetic to bother with, is the moral of that story. I was petrified though either way. When I was like 10, I talked to someone all the time through the like 6-inch tall slit window to our basement. He would always tell me not to go in the basement when I'd ask to see him cause he wouldn't be there anyway. Talked to him for a year and a half. Told me not to tell my mom cause he didn't want to scare her. A few years later I was telling my mom about the guy in the basement. I quit talking to him by then, and she told me she could believe me because when I was a baby she would always see my door to my room open like someone was peeking in to see if I was all right and then shutting it quietly. Told me that she figured it was the guy who owned the house before us because that used to be his grandkids' room. It was one of those small towns where our grandparents knew each other. My sister saw something on several occasions throughout our lives. I never actually saw anything, only heard something extremely vividly. Basically, one night everything was happening like usual. My mom was out with her friends watching some game, and my dad was watching a movie with my sister and I. It was a comedy, so we all went to bed laughing about it. I was lying in bed about half an hour after we were tucked in, reading a book. I heard somebody stomping down the hallway downstairs, and then full-on sprinting up the stairs. I figured it was just my sister coming back from getting a drink or something, but I would have seen her leave her room because our doors are right beside each other, and the staircase is just around the corner. So then I figured it was just my mom coming back home and for some reason being extremely loud. The way my door is angled lets me see anybody who comes up the stairs, so I was watching and waiting as they seemed to be in quite a hurry. The footsteps were getting higher and higher up the stairs, but as soon as they got to the top, they completely stopped. There was nothing. My eyes were still totally fixed on the hallway as I got up to check who it was. I turned the corner and there was nobody. I immediately got covered head to toe with goosebumps and tried to piece together what could have happened. Not even 2 seconds later I hear my sister screaming, and she comes bolting out of her room with complete terror on her face. Without hesitating, we run into our dad's room, where he is already standing up and asking what's wrong. My sister points back to her room crying and says, "There's a man." My dad rushes into the hall, turns the light on, and then turns the light on in her room. He checks the closet and behind everything but doesn't find anything. Then he walks into my room and does the same, but still finds nothing. We spent the next 15 or so minutes holding his hand as he searched the rest of the house, flicking every single light on. He calls my mom to see if she had been home, but she says she's still with her friends. I could even hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone speaker. We all slept in my dad's room that night. Over the course of the next 7 or so years, my sister had run out of her room crying about the same man in her room. She says he just stands there in the corner and watches her. She described him as a very tall man in a top hat and a trench coat, like a detective, she said. Everything completely black. It was a couple years after that I stumble upon what's known as the top hat demon, or the phantom hat man. It turns out it's an actual phenomenon. Every description and drawing is exactly what she described that day. My son has seen him several times. I didn't know it was a phenomenon until recently. He would wake up at night and see the man standing in a corner in his room, on top of his toy box, staring at him, wearing a dark cloak and a top hat. Sometimes the clock was covering his head, if I remember correctly. A few years ago, my wife and I spent 3 months in Bermuda for work. Initially, we rented a large detached house whose owners were back in the States. There was one locked room on the top floor, presumably containing the owner's personal possessions. After a few nights, we both began to hear footsteps from upstairs. This was relatively easy to ignore as we put it down to rodents, even though they sounded human. Long footsteps and heavy. We had checked the locked door and there was never any sign of movement there. One night I was asleep when, in my dazed state, I imagined somebody right by my face shouting, "Wake up." This was from my right side. My wife was sleeping to my left. Immediately after, I felt myself pulled down the bed. I awoke to find my legs hanging off the end of the bed and my right cheek moist, as if somebody had shouted at me from 6 inches and their saliva had sprayed my face. I panicked, woke up my wife and checked the room, but there was nobody there. I checked the rest of the house and all was quiet. I washed my face quite vigorously after, though. We left the house soon after that night and claimed the company flat as soon as it became available. Never had anything like that happen to me before or since. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write in the comments under the video stories when you saw something strange but no one believed you. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos, and I advise you to watch our other videos.